Awesome. Right. So, what we'll do then, we'll move on to our third segment, which, as hopefully everyone's getting familiar with, this is the one that changes week by week. This week, we're trying something a little bit different in the sense of.
Oh, yeah. I'm dressed up as popcorn.
We're going
I'm
to the
doing a
movies,
dance.
Carl. You coming?
It's good shit.
Oh, yeah. I love it. Yeah, so basically, this is A2theK at the movies, and it's something that if we enjoy it or if we can see more mileage in it, we might do it again. Maybe do specifically talk about one film in a bit more detail. But this week, what I want to do is just sort of, in no particular order really, but just go through some of the films that are based around wrestling that we love. Especially because it got me thinking, and if you don't mind, Carl, I'll start with my first one. Because I heard about this quite recently. That's one of the films I loved as a kid, and still love now. I would happily watch it again. I've got it somewhere, totally legally downloaded somewhere. And you and me both enjoyed it as teens, and that's Ready to Rumble, which is very much a WCW film, right? And the reason I want to mention this one first, and the reason it's kind of inspired me to do this segment, is apparently it's not a very popular film at all, like with the wrestling community. And I love it. It tweaks my nostalgia, something shocking. And I think it's a really enjoyable film. It's just goofy as fuck. But it's even gone down as being classed as the nail in the coffin for WCW, because this is when they were on their way out the door, really. And it was like, yeah, that. And don't get me wrong, I see why, because they then sought to put David Arquette in WCW with the fucking title. That probably didn't help. But yeah, I love this film. And for anyone who's not seen it, I would recommend watching it. And essentially, and I think the reason I love it so much is because it's about two wrestling fans who then basically get embroiled in the world of wrestling. It treats it as kayfabe is real. So, you know, their favorite wrestler is betrayed, and the title stripped of him, and he's kicked out of the WCW. And they set out on a mission to find him and bring him back to his glory. And it features a ton of wrestlers. I mean, some of the main names that you'll see that are still in the industry today, the likes of Goldberg and the like. And we had Diamond Dallas Page, who's a legend. He was actually playing the bad guy in this. But yeah, apparently it's not that popular a film. But I mean, what did you think of it, Carl? I know. Apologies, I'm speaking for you, but
it holds a very special place in my heart. I think came out in 2000, so it was probably when we were just formulating our friendship at that point, as we met each other in high school around that time. So, well, exactly. So it's we're like 11, 12 years old.
I think we met in that
kind
year,
of
to be fair.
aware of the wrestling scene. Obviously, I was a massive fan. Not necessarily of WCW. I did watch it, especially throughout the Monday Night Wars. But as you mentioned, this was coming to the end of, it was like 2000. I think it ended in 2001, 2002, WCW. So it was coming towards the end, but I still knew all the kind of the main guys in it. And yeah, it's as you said, it was silly. But it was hilarious. It was, to two 11, 12-year-old kids. It was what more can you want from a movie? It had wrestling, it had comedy, it was slapstick. It had all the wrestlers in there that you'd grew up watching, and I really liked it. It's not going to win an Oscar anytime soon. Let's be fucking honest. But as far as a wrestling film goes, it was really good. I still like it to this day.
I think. Yeah, me too. And that's the thing. And I don't know if I like it to this day out of nostalgia. But I think what probably helps is the age we watched it at, because obviously at that point, I think we were both aspiring wrestlers, which, spoilers for everyone at home, that never happened. But we were both like, yeah, we're going to do that one day. And then we're watching a film about two people who fucking love wrestling. And then, again, spoilers for the film, end up becoming wrestlers. So it's like, look at that. That's like so relatable. Not relatable, but relatable. And I think that's probably what helped as well, because as 11-year-old fanboys, that was a brilliant sort of plot, really, for us. But again, I watched it a couple of months back, and it's still really fun to watch. Again, like you say, it's not an Oscar winner. It's goofy as fuck, But it's brilliant. If you're into wrestling, if you loved WCW, you're going to see the likes of Sting, Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page. I think you see some people who don't talk in there, but I think trying to remember half the wrestlers who were in there. But I think you even see a young Rey Mysterio knocking about in there. Not a lot of people have speaking parts, but there's a ton of WCW talent in there. I have a fun fact for you, Carl,
I've literally
as well.
just pulled up.
Did you know
I've literally
John
just
Cena is in this
I've
film?
pulled up Wikipedia just to remind myself.
Ah.
So I pulled it up, and obviously
you fucking cheat.
Wikipedia can tell you lies. So I did second, like, do a double take at this, but yeah, apparently he's in the film uncredited. I really want to go and watch this film again right now.
Yeah, he's no, I can confirm that he's actually in the scene. There's a scene in there when basically the main guy, who is essentially a rip-off of Jerry the King, because he's quite literally Jimmy the King. He's the sort of the wrestler who was betrayed at the beginning of the film, so he's setting out to sort of build up a stable, as it were. So there's a scene when he goes to the gym to approach Goldberg, to recruit Goldberg, and John Cena is uncredited, but he's one of the people in the gym working out in the background, and he's not in the shot for very long, but he's there.
That is
so yeah, fun
absolutely
fact,
mental.
It's even got
I was just looking
John
as well,
Cena
and obviously I forgot
film.
Tony Schiavone.
It's definitely worth a watch.
Was on commentary at the time of WCW, so you'll get to see AEW's current commentator as part of this film as well.
See, blows your mind. I mean, when you can see, like, this is the surreal thing with it. Like, you never knew where the wrestling world was going to go at the time, but Bill Goldberg, the main man of WCW, is now the one holding the Universal title, and you can see him in this film, a WCW product, which obviously it's all owned by WWE now anyway, but whatever. It's just crazy to think. But yeah, very enjoyable film. I won't go too much into it because we've got a few to list. But if you're after just a light-hearted, goofy, not taking itself too serious kind of film, then this is the one for you. And if you're
so I think obviously we've gone through the.
Carl, would you like to do the next one?
You know, like what's the word for it? Not a documentary. Did the one? No, so like a normal film.
Mockumentary.
Yes, a fiction. So we've gone through a fiction film. The
no,
next one on the
like
list
a fiction.
It was a documentary. Some of you may have seen it before, called Beyond the Mat. So this came out in 1999. And I was obsessed with this film. So I think Anthony mentioned, you know, at the time we were both kind of wannabe wrestlers. You know, I'd eventually, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in future podcasts, I did kind of go down that route for a little bit of trying to learn how to be a pro wrestler. But this was my kind of first taste of like looking into behind the scenes of wrestling, and it was just absolutely fascinating. What I'm assuming you've seen this as well, Anthony, a couple of times.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, it's not something I've gone back to in any sort of recent years, but I think probably off your recommendation, I've seen it. But like you say, it's a fascinating watch. It is very much. Is it biographical? Is that the right term? It is a very much a documentary style thing, isn't it? So, depending on what you're after from a film, but if you're interested in the industry and in that sort of sense of the sort of
absolutely,
the I think the industry, then I think
what made it so interesting was it came at the wrestling industry from a number of different angles. So, you know, you've got the main guy who's doing this documentary. You know, part of it is him getting like a behind the scenes in you know, Connecticut at the WWF at the time corporate offices. So you get to see him kind of with Vince and with like I think at the time they've got Droz, who was an up and coming wrestler at that time. Well, exactly. And it's like they've got a scene in there where Droz kind of comes in, and they're they're basically saying that they're trying to come up with a gimmick for him, and you know, Droz happens to have the very unique skill of being able to regurgitate on command. So obviously there's a scene in there where Vince is saying, okay, then, you know, the cameras are on you, go on, do it. And like, basically they say, if he can do this, they're going to call him Puke. And that's going to be his wrestling name. So it's like he's there trying to throw up in a bin. So it's like you got all this crazy stuff with like behind the scenes of stuff, and they also concentrate very heavily on Mick Foley, in this documentary, and like specifically around at the time was his feud with The Rock. It's a real kind of behind the scenes showing the impact on his family, because he takes a lot of bumps and a lot of high risk stuff, and it's. I mean, I don't want to.
I think this is the thing. I mean, we've mentioned on previous podcasts. I think it might have been last week's about how Mick Foley is. It was when we were actually doing our top 10 wrestlers, because I listed him because of his commitment to putting people over and what he's willing to put himself through. And I think this sort of captures that sort of.
I don't want to say it's over
sensationalized,
like as a wrestler. But you do get to see the toll it takes on his family as well. The specific example is he's got a match with The Rock, which I think is an I Quit match. And, this match, if you've ever seen it, is notorious for the fact that, there was no punches were pulled. There's a part of that match where The Rock literally bashes the shit out of Mick Foley's skull with a steel chair. And meanwhile, his hands are behind his back and he's handcuffed. So there's no stopping it with the hand and things like that. And obviously, you get to see after the match, his head's all busted open, he's bleeding, and his kids are there. And as a dad now, like if I haven't actually watched it back since becoming a dad, but I think if I watch it back now, from memory, you just see like how upset and stuff his kids are. They don't understand.
I actually, I think if you watched it back now, it probably end up
exactly
to your eye, to be honest, mate, because you end up a bit more soft and emotional with kids anyway, don't you? You know what I mean? And I think it's harder to see stuff when you can relate to something so much more.
Yeah,
it makes it harder to watch.
Definitely.
So I think that would probably be quite a hard thing to see now.
You get to see how it affects them as people. So it's kind of a behind the scenes of how we got into wrestling, stuff like that, and there's a few bits and bobs around that. So you've got the mainstream stuff with behind the scenes in WWF at the time, and also kind of a biopic on Foley. Then you've got the other side of wrestling. So you've got the indie scene. So they look at ECW specifically. So at the time, a lot of everything they did on their television show was, it was filmed out of Paul Heyman's mother's basement. All the promos and stuff. That's where it took place. And we've just been talking about Paul Heyman. He's like one of the lead writers on SmackDown or wherever he is at the moment. Today, getting involved in everything, and it's like to see his kind of where he started to put his own company over and stuff like that, and you get to see the whole behind the scenes. He's shooting promos while his mum's doing ironing in the background. It's crazy to watch, considering what we know now and where it all went. So you get to see the rise of ECW. You've also got even earlier than that of a wrestling school. I think it happens to be the same wrestling school that John Cena came from. But effectively, you get to see, a guy who owns a wrestling school, and he's got two hot prospects who have got tryouts with the WWF. And at the time, Jim Ross was their kind of head of talent relations. So he's the one who's kind of monitoring them. So they go out and have a dark match, and it's around like, they're both working real jobs because they can't supplement themselves from, they just want to become famous and want to become WWE wrestlers. So it's kind of, you get to follow along with their journey all the way through to the other side of former wrestlers who, have come into either the end of their career, which, in this case, it's with Terry Funk, who has retired about 6 or 7 times. I think he's still probably having matches to this day. Fucking God knows how old he is, but, about how hard it is for him to leave the business. And then also Jake the Snake, where, he's had quite a few demons in his life, and you get that kind of really raw, documentary of him and his life and the impact like drugs has had on him as a person, on his relationship with his kids and his family. And all in all, for a wrestling fan, you just get to see the business from every angle. And, it's had some criticism, like how kind of genuine it is, or like the portrayal of the wrestling industry and things like that. But, for me, I still see this as one of the best wrestling movies that has ever been, really, just especially again watching it at that age that I watched it, and before everyone knew everything about the whole business. It was to have that insight and to see the whole inner workings and how it all happens. It's just a fantastic movie. If you've not seen it, I do highly recommend it. It's still relevant to this day. And yeah, all in all, it's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could contribute anything, Carl. I think you've summed that up perfectly. In all fairness, but again, for us, and this is sort of the crux of this list, it's a must-watch if you're a wrestling fan. So the next one I'll talk about is actually quite a recent one and quite a British one, and that is Fighting with My Family, which is basically I want to say a fictionalization of Paige's life and her introduction into the world of WWE. I don't know how much is accurate, which is why I'll call it a fictionalization, because obviously it's been made. So there's people playing characters here, so it's not going to be a documentary style film, but it is based on a lot of actual events. So this, for those who don't know Paige, obviously she is a British girl. She comes from a family of wrestlers, and basically it just shows sort of her life being raised with them, always being involved in wrestling. They had their own sort of smaller.
That's a
I don't
great
suppose you know what their wrestling.
I actually don't know.
No, it's no problem. But basically, they had their own small time wrestling company. They would put on shows locally. And she would always be involved with her dad, with her brothers, with her mum. And then the big thing for them was to be called up to the WWE. So the film covers her and her brother being called up to the WWE. And then obviously it covers the difficulty that was had between the family when her brother didn't make it, but she did. She went to developmental, she went to the NXT. Well, I think that's probably where some of the fictionalized elements come in, because she went to the NXT brand, and I don't know if NXT was actually fully formed at that point when she in real life. I could be wrong on that, but because she was quite an early wrestler, I'm not sure whether she was actually in developmental and then NXT started to exist. But again, minor digressions there. Yeah, and then it just covers her rise to being the youngest ever Divas champion, as it was at the time. This film is a very interesting watch. It shows that she has got a very interesting life. I certainly learned things about her that I didn't know. It was actually really pushed quite heavily by The Rock, who I believe, I want to say producer in some element, but he was sort of heavily behind. It's a WWE Studios product, but The Rock was heavily behind getting this off the ground, and he was all for this story. And obviously he features in the film along with a couple of other wrestlers. I think The Big Show and Sheamus surprisingly had a scene in there as well. But yeah, it's a fantastic watch. It's a real it's a feel good film, really, I suppose. It adds that extra element to it that it's true on some level. But you get to see her go from where she was right up to the top that a woman wrestler could go at the time. And again, a fantastic film. And
yeah, I think you've absolutely nailed it. It's probably the most recent film that we've got on our list, and I think it's just a fantastic film. So I think the backstory to this was, I think The Rock was shooting something over in London. I'm not sure if it was one of the Fast and Furious movies or something, and basically this.
Yeah, without being nerdy on it, I think it was Fast
I think he was basically in a hotel room.
A lot in
he couldn't
London
get to sleep. He was flicking over the channels, and he found himself on Channel 4, and just so happened to be watching the real life documentary called Fighting with My Family, which was about the wrestling family, the Beavis family. And he was just fascinated by it. And obviously this is way before, Paige ever got signed and things like that. But obviously he was really fascinated by that and was like, wow, that this will make a great movie someday. And then little did we know how events would transpire. And obviously for both The Rock and for Paige. But yeah, there's certainly bits of it were embellished, I think, as you've said, once she actually came over to the States and, all that kind of stuff, I think was a little bit embellished. But, for the most part, it is literally just about this crazy wrestling family. Imagine it's kind of like the Hearts in a sense. They're the UK version of the Hearts who just got brought up into this kind of. I think she is a bit of a gypsy.
Yeah.
I don't think she'd mind us saying that. I think her family, is a family of gypsies who are wrestlers, and to spend your life from such a young age kind of living that life, and with your brother and the rest of your siblings who want to become wrestlers, and then to kind of go through all that only for the heartbreak of your brother not making it, and then you end up just being sent off to this country on your own at like 19 years old or however young she was. She's been on a hell of a journey.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think part of the film as well, it really covers her struggle with that of like trying to fit in but trying not to lose herself, which is I think is handled really well in the film. I just another little note, because it's come to me when you were saying about her family, is that it does it shows you her dad as well, and it's a shame because I'd like to know more about her dad because of this film, because they make comments in the film that essentially wrestling saved his life, because he was and again, I don't think anyone would have an issue with us mentioning this because it's covered in the film, but he was a criminal before that. He'd done time in prison. He makes no bones about the fact that he'd committed burglaries and the like, and he was heading down that path, and meeting his wife and starting this wrestling company together as a family is what saved him. And I think that in itself is fascinating enough. But then when you couple it with Paige's rise into WWE,
definitely check it out.
It just makes for a fantastic
I think
film.
it's probably available now on local streaming services.
I think it's currently available on Netflix. If you're not already subscribed, I believe it's $9.99 a month. I've done that before. I could be wrong. They move the prices so much. I don't know. But yeah, it is actually on Netflix because
so the next one on my list is another documentary style.
And then Carl, do you want to go over the next one?
Watch is Wrestling with Shadows, and it's Bret Hart's kind of self-produced documentary. So it's really fascinating, this film. It's I think it's crazy, really, because this is filmed leading up to the Montreal Screwjob, and it's mad that he would just so happen to be recording his life at this point and making this documentary while all this transpired. But, considering everything that went on, it's crazy to kind of knowing what happened, to follow along with this documentary. And it covers everything from how he got started in the business, and, his first, from Stampede days working for his dad, through his first few matches in the WWF at the time, to all the way up to is basically, as WCW were kicking WWF's ass in the ratings, and Vince basically came out to Bret and said, I can't afford to pay you anymore. So this is kind of in the big lead up to, the decision that Bret had to make of, okay, well, they can't pay me, I'm going to have to go to WCW, even though he didn't want to, and tried everything to make it work. And it just so happened that this was all kind of captured on, the documentary he was filming at the time. So it's a really incredible watch. But one of the highlights of it is you get to see post Screwjob of, so for anyone who doesn't know the story, which I'd be surprised if you don't, but the Montreal Screwjob was effectively Bret was the champ. He was going to WCW and he was having a match with Shawn Michaels, and he had creative control in his contract, and he said, I'm not going to lose the title in Montreal because I've got creative control. I'm happy to drop the title the next night. Just let me go out the way that I want to go out. And Vince was like, yeah, fine. Little did he know, he got Shawn, Earl Hebner, who was the ref, a few other of the agents, very, very, not many people knew about it. And they basically got Shawn to put the sharpshooter on Bret, and then the referee calls for the bell, and basically just steals the title off Bret, and yes, wrestling's fake. Yes, it's predetermined, but obviously, within Bret's contract, he had creative control. He wasn't meant to lose the match that night, and Vince just took it into his own hands. So what you do get to see on this is after that match, Vince kind of locks himself away. Bret's in the locker room, and eventually Vince comes in to kind of try and talk to him. And there's a scene where basically Bret tells the cameraman, yeah, you might want to turn the camera off. And it cuts, when it comes back on, you just see Vince being held up by, I think it's Pat Patterson and Joe Briscoe. And he's out of it. And it goes back to Bret, and he goes, yeah, somehow Vince may have fell into my hand. And basically basically, Brett then reveals that he knocked Vince McMahon out with one punch, and he was like, "That's the way his dad would have dealt with it. He got screwed over. You know, he had to give him a punch and then just be done with it. You know, obviously." He was never done with it. He harbored that grudge, and he probably still does to this day. You know, for a long, long time. But
yeah,
well, exactly. But I just think it's such a fantastic watch.
Oh, yeah, I think he's still a little.
I think,
bit
to be honest, you can just watch it on YouTube now. I think it's up there for people to watch. So definitely check it out. But yeah, really, really good documentary.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'll have to admit this is one I haven't seen. I will certainly be giving it a watch off your recommendation, Carl, because it sounds fascinating. But when we were putting the list together, I noticed this one on the list, and I was like, you know what, I've not seen that one, but I thought that'll add a bit to this segment, so I'll find out what it's about. So that's certainly one I'll be watching. So, yeah,
maybe slightly.
It sounds like a fascinating thing, and it seems you have a bit of an affinity for the documentary style.
Mm-hmm.
So what we'll do, Carl, because we've got 10 minutes left of the cast, so we'll end on the next one if you're okay with it. Because I don't know about yourself, but I've been enjoying the segment, so it's certainly something we might do again. Might be going into more detail on some we've already talked about, maybe add a few more in, that sort of thing. But I think we'll go to the movies again, certainly. So the last one for the night is, and it's got to be worth mentioning, is The Wrestler, starring Mickey Rourke. And the reason that this one deserves a mention, you might this is probably the closest thing we've got to a sort of a Rocky type film for the wrestling industry. Obviously the later Rockies, because it's about, you know, the guy who's, you know, past it, as it were, and just wants to another shot at glory, as it, you know, that sort of storyline. So it kind of very much covers Rocky 201 or whatever it was, where he was old and wants to come back. But it has that sort of, it's not a goofy film, it's completely fictional, but it's very gritty and it's a very enjoyable film. It's been a while since I've seen it, in all honesty, but again, it's a very enjoyable film. It's got quite, I'm desperately trying to remember the ending, but I feel like it's either a very ambiguous ending or a very sad ending, in the sense of you know, he gets to live his moments.
So it's ambiguous, I think. So for anyone who kind of hasn't seen it,
I'm trying to recall.
So kind of similar to what I was mentioning about Terry Funk in the
spoilers
documentary is, you know, as we know in the wrestling business, once you get into it, it's really hard to just let it go and to retire and just kind of be done with it. Like, once you're a wrestler, you are a wrestler, and you can't, you know, wrestlers kind of cling on to it, and they just can't. They don't know when is enough, because it's all they've ever known. And this kind of tells the story about the Ram, I think is his character name in this, and effectively he was big at one point in time. He's now at the point where, you know, his career's very long gone. He's working the convention scene, doing like autographs for, like, you know, $5 a time and stuff like that. And they basically, you know, he can't let it go, and they basically try and drum up interest to do like a rematch of his biggest ever match that he was involved in. So it's kind of, he's still doing this, but to try and make money any way he can. He's no longer in the heyday of like the WWFs, if you will, but he's more like in the indie scene, but like doing hardcore matches and getting stapled in the head and stuff like that. He's like similar to the likes of, like, I was thinking of people like Sabu and, you know, stuff like that. Is kind of reminded me of that, and especially Terry Funk is the biggest you know, connection I can make.
Yeah, I think it's almost.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it is. You know,
I don't know this
it
for
is
a fact, but you imagine they pulled a lot of inspiration from the likes of Terry
Funk, the late Roddy
fair.
Piper, who's one of my favorites. I remember he said when he watched this, you know, it brought him to tears. Like, he wept watching it, because he could relate to it so much, as, you know.
Yeah, I imagine it must be much more poignant when you've been in the industry.
To like your point before, where you mentioned about the ending and stuff like that, is basically,
like, how do you leave something like that?
Like a heart condition that's obviously been brought on from all the years in the ring, and probably from, you know, steroid abuse and stuff. I think it's alluded to.
Yeah, I don't think they out and out say it, but there's that suggestion.
So I think it's like, you know,
obviously was
had
right
a few incidents
where,
probably,
like, still is on some level.
You know, he's fainted and passed out and had heart troubles, and he's basically been told, like, you need to stop. But he just can't bring himself to stop. So, you know, spoilers, you know, if it hasn't been spoiled already, is like the film basically ends where, you know, that rematch does go ahead.
Sorry.
You know, the match from his heyday, and it gets quite a good audience there, and you know, he's in his element. Yeah, it's on a pretty big stage, at least in comparison to what he was, you know, where he has been
it's
working.
on that big stage. Yeah.
Exactly, and basically
it's
in the middle of the
not
ring, it's kind of alluded to that he's
ends on a much bigger
almost had
scale
another heart attack mid-match.
Yeah.
You know, he's like getting all dizzy and hazy, and like his opponent even saying, "Are you okay?" kind of thing, and he nods it on, and then he gets to the top rope, and you know, his finishing moves like a diving elbow drop or like a diving double axe handle or something like that, and it kind of finishes with him on the top rope just jumping off. So I'm guessing they're alluding to that he probably is going to have a heart attack and die after that, but it's never explicitly, you know, said.
Yeah, but it's one of them films that it probably will bring a tear to you. Like it is that sort of emotional sort of film, but a fantastic film. And again, like in terms of that sort of that emotional level, it's the closest thing we've got to a Rocky type of film for wrestling. Certainly that's sort of how, because I love the Rocky films, so that's how I sort of relate to it in that sense. But
yeah, definitely. I think
again, another one I think it's,
you know, it's critically acclaimed as well. It's been nominated. I think it was even Oscar nominated for Mickey Rourke from a Best Actor perspective. I'm not sure whether the actual film got a nomination, but it's honestly it is really good. So you should definitely check it out if you've not seen it.
Yeah, and again, without sounding like I'm plugging a certain company, I believe that is also available on Netflix at the moment. And as I say, that there are plenty more we could go through. This segment, if it's something that I think people are enjoying and something that we're certainly enjoying, is something that I would like to do again. Certainly an idea I've had going forward is potentially films that we enjoy, or big films that involve a lot of wrestlers, citing an example of like The Longest Yard, for instance, that sort of thing, you know, to expand the sort of the realm of the A2theK, the movies out. But that is just something we're toying with at the moment.
One thing that
jumped out at me then when we were chatting through the first film,
which was Ready to Rumble, you know, I wonder whether there'd be any kind of people would be up for us doing almost like a little watch along to that, where both you and I watch it together and kind of podcast us while we watch it and react to it as, you know, 30-something-year-olds.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I would certainly be up for that. So again, if it's something, I mean, we'll probably do that anyway because it sounds like a lot of fun. But certainly this sort of segment and this sort of thing is I think something that we'll probably will revisit again down the line. And unfortunately, guys, I know you're going to be gutted, but this is the end of this week's podcast. So I know, don't shed a tear. We'll be back next week. So
yes, we
that's
will.
it from me.
Thank you all again.
Carl, I will
hope you enjoyed.
I'll probably speak to you a lot sooner than that, but we will certainly be back next week, mate.